The Afghan sun had barely crept over the jagged Hindu Kush mountains when Captain Sarah Chen arrived at the staging area. He'd already shimmered off the tarmac at forward operating base Shank, promising another scorching day in Lagar province. She adjusted the straps of her tactical vest, feeling the unfamiliar weight of field gear she hadn't worn in over a year. Her hands, more accustomed to computer keyboards and intelligence reports, fumbled slightly with the chest rig buckles. "First time in the field, Captain." Sarah looked up to see a young private offering her a knowing smile. He couldn't have been more than 22, but his dust-covered uniform and weathered face suggested he'd seen more combat than most people twice his age. "Something like that," Sarah replied, finally securing the vest properly. She didn't elaborate, didn't mention that she'd spent 6 years flying into the most dangerous airspace in theater, or that the last time she wore a survival vest, she'd crawled out of a burning aircraft with 3 fractured vertebrae. That was a different life, a different version of herself. The private nodded and moved on, leaving Sarah to gather her gear. She picked up her M4 carbine, cleaned and zeroed yesterday, and checked the chamber out of habit. The weapon felt both familiar and foreign in her hands. Familiar because she'd qualified expert with it for years. Foreign because for the past 18 months, the most dangerous thing she'd handled was classified documents. "All right, listen up," a voice boomed across the staging area. Major Jake Morrison strode toward the group, his presence commanding immediate attention. 6 special operations soldiers snapped to readiness, their movements synchronized from countless missions together. Sarah recognized the dynamic instantly. This was a tight team, forged in combat, suspicious of outsiders. She was definitely an outsider. Morrison was every inch the stereotype of a special ops commander. 6'2", square-jawed, with intense gray eyes that seemed to evaluate and dismiss people in the same glance. His uniform bore the patches and tabs that spoke of Ranger training, multiple deployments, and a career spent in the sharp end of America's forever wars. "Final brief in 5, Morrison announced, his eyes scanning the team before landing on Sarah. He paused just for a heartbeat, and she saw it, the flicker of doubt, the silent question of why some analyst was being attached to his team. He didn't say anything, didn't need to, his expression said it all. The team gathered around a tactical map spread across the hood of a dusty Humvee. Morning light cast long shadows across the topographic lines, showing the mountains they'd be infiltrating. "Target area is here," Morrison tapped a valley 30 miles east. "Intelligence suggests the HVT uses this route to move between safe houses. We insert at 400 tomorrow, establish an observation post on this ridgeline, and use our Reaper drone to track his patterns over 48 hours. If we can confirm his schedule, we can call in a precision strike or a capture team." Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, pointed at the map. "What about the civilian population in the valley, sir?" "Minimal, maybe 2 dozen scattered compounds. That's why we're using the Reaper standoff observation, no direct contact. We stay invisible, gather intel, get out clean." Morrison's finger traced their extraction route. "Questions?" "What about her?" Staff Sergeant David Kim nodded toward Sarah, not unkindly but not warmly either. "No offense, ma'am, but we don't usually bring analysts into the field." Morrison straightened, and Sarah felt the weight of everyone's attention. "Captain Chen is attached to us by order of Colonel Matthews. She's been analyzing this target for 6 months, knows his patterns better than anyone. Command wants eyes on confirmation of her intelligence assessments." "Respectfully, sir," Lieutenant James Barnes interjected, "that's what we're for. We can relay what we see. Why risk an analyst in hostile territory?" The question hung in the air. Sarah could answer it, could explain that she'd volunteered, that sitting in an air-conditioned TOC watching other people take risks had been slowly killing her spirit, that she needed to feel useful again in a tangible way. But she remained silent. This wasn't her team. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. He clearly hadn't been thrilled with the decision either. Because those are our orders, Lieutenant. Chen stays at the op, monitors the drone feed, provides real-time analysis. She keeps her head down and stays out of the way. He looked directly at Sarah. Understood, Captain. Yes, sir, Sarah replied crisply. I'm here to support the mission, not complicate it. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Corporal Jennifer Martinez, the team's medic. Sarah caught the tail end of their silent conversation, the raised eyebrow, the subtle head shake. She'd seen it before in ready rooms and briefing spaces. The look that said, "Great, we're babysitting." "Gear check in 30, wheels up at 3:30, Morrison concluded, rolling up the map. "Get some rest. It's going to be a long 48 hours. The team dispersed, heading toward their barracks or the chow hall. Sarah started to follow but heard Rodriguez's voice, not quite whispered, from behind a nearby vehicle. "Can't believe they're sending a desk jockey with us. This isn't some PowerPoint presentation, you know." "Cut her some slack, man," Martinez replied. "It's not her fault command made the call." I know. Just saying we're going deep, no backup, and now we have to worry about someone who's probably never been shot at. Hope she doesn't freeze up if things go sideways." Sarah kept walking, her face impassive. She'd learned long ago not to react to assumptions. Let them think what they wanted. Let them see her as just another analyst playing soldier for a few days. They'd find out the truth soon enough. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe this mission would go exactly as planned, and she'd return to her desk without ever needing to prove she was anything more than what they assumed. But deep down, in a place where old instincts still lived, Sarah knew better. Things never went exactly as planned. She touched the dog tags beneath her uniform shirt, her real ones, not the sanitized ones she wore openly. They were warm against her skin, a reminder of who she used to be. Phoenix, the call sign she'd earned in fire and blood, the identity she'd been forced to leave behind. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Sarah found a quiet corner to check her gear one final time. Tomorrow, they'd fly into the mountains. Tomorrow, she'd be just another piece of equipment to this team. But tomorrow wasn't here yet. And something in the air, maybe intuition honed over hundreds of combat missions, maybe just the warrior's sixth sense that never quite goes away, told her this operation wouldn't be routine. The mountains were waiting. And so was her past. The CH-47 Chinook's twin rotors beat a thunderous rhythm against the night sky as it skimmed low over the Afghan terrain. Inside the cargo bay, red light bathed everything in an eerie crimson glow. Sarah sat on the nylon bench seat, pressed between her rucksack and the vibrating fuselage wall, watching the special operations team through different eyes than they watched her. They sat with the practiced stillness of warriors entering combat, weapons resting across laps, eyes half closed but alert, bodies swaying in unison with the helicopter's movements. Rodriguez had his head back against the metal wall, lips moving silently. Prayer, maybe, or a mental checklist. Martinez methodically checked her medical kit for the third time. Morrison stared at nothing, his face carved from stone. Sarah recognized the ritual. She'd lived it herself dozens of times, sitting in cockpits while ground crews loaded ordnance, knowing that in minutes she'd be flying into skis filled with bullets and missiles. The waiting was always the hardest part, those final moments before chaos, when your mind could still catalog everything that might go wrong. The loadmaster held up 5 fingers, 5 minutes. The team stirred, checking weapons and gear with synchronized precision. Sarah did the same, ensuring her rifle's safety was on, her radio positioned correctly, her night vision mount secure on her helmet. The familiar motion steadied her nerves. Through the Chinook's open ramp, she could see the mountains rising like black teeth against the starlit sky. Beautiful and deadly, just like she remembered. The Hindu Kush had tried to kill her once before, on a mission that ended with her Warthog limping back to base on one engine, hydraulics failing, barely enough altitude to clear the peaks. She'd survived that. She'd survived this. The helicopter banked hard, following the terrain contours. Sarah's stomach lurched, but she kept her face neutral. Beside her, she felt Kim glance her way, probably watching for signs of airsickness or fear. She gave him nothing. 1 minute. The crew chief began hand signals. The team rose as one, weapons ready, moving toward the ramp with the fluid coordination of men who'd done this 100 times. Sarah shouldered her pack and fell in behind Martinez, keeping her spacing, staying in the flow. The Chinook flared hard, its nose pitching up as the pilots arrested their descent. The landing gear kissed rock with a metallic screech, and Morrison was already moving, leading them down the ramp into a swirling cloud of dust and debris. Sarah's boots hit Afghan soil at 4:13 local time. The Chinook was gone 30 seconds later, its rotor wash fading into the distance, leaving them in sudden, profound silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums after hours of engine noise. The kind that makes you aware of every breath, every heartbeat. Morrison's hand signals sent them moving. They covered the 200 meters to their observation post in tactical bounds, one element moving while the other provided cover. Sarah kept pace, her rifle up, scanning her sector. The night vision turned the world into shades of green and black, every rock and shadow potentially hostile. The op was a natural formation of boulders near the ridgeline, offering concealment and clear sight lines into the valley below. The team set up with practiced efficiency, Morrison and Barnes taking firing positions, Rodriguez establishing the communications array, Kim and Martinez creating a fallback position. Sarah set up her laptop and monitors in a recessed area, linking to the Reaper drone that was already orbiting 20,000 feet overhead. "Comms check," Morrison whispered into his radio. "TOC, this is Sierra 16, radio check, over," Rodriguez spoke into his headset. "Sierra 16, TOC reads you Lima Charlie. Confirm your posit, over." Rodriguez rattled off their coordinates. "TOC confirms. We're online, sir." Morrison nodded. "Chen, how's the drone feed?" Sarah studied her screen, watching the infrared imagery of the valley below. "Crystal clear, sir. I've got full control from here. The HVT's suspected compound is there," she pointed at her screen, 3 clicks northeast. "Good, Martinez, Kim, get some rest. We'll rotate every 4 hours. Stay sharp, people. This is surveillance only. We're ghosts." The first 18 hours were textbook. They watched. They waited. They documented. Sarah tracked movements in the valley, logging vehicle patterns, identifying faces through the drone's powerful cameras, building the pattern-of-life analysis that would make or break the operation. She fell into the familiar rhythm of intelligence work, except this time she wasn't in an air-conditioned operations center. This time, she could smell the dust and feel the sun's brutal heat on her position. The team largely ignored her, which was fine. She wasn't here for camaraderie. The afternoon of the second day brought the first hints of trouble. Dark clouds began massing over the peaks to the north, their anvil tops reaching into the stratosphere. Sarah had seen enough Afghan weather to know what was coming. "Major, we should secure the equipment," she said quietly. "That's going to be a significant electrical storm." Morrison glanced at the clouds, then at Rodriguez. "Sergeant, weatherproof everything. Get the drone back to high altitude, Chen." "Already done, sir." But the storm moved faster than any of them expected. One moment, the clouds were distant. The next, they were overhead, turning afternoon into twilight. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Wind began howling through the rocks. Then the lightning started. Not the distant flashes Sarah had anticipated, but close, violent strikes that turned the world white and made the air smell like ozone. Thunder crashed so loudly it felt physical, like invisible fists pounding their position. "Get that antenna down." Morrison shouted as a bolt hit the ridge 50 meters away. Rodriguez was already moving, but nature moved faster. A lightning strike hit their position with the force of an artillery round. The communications array exploded in a shower of sparks and melted circuitry, the blast wave knocking Rodriguez backward into the rocks. "Martinez," Morrison yelled. The medic was already moving to Rodriguez, checking him for injuries. "He's okay, stunned but okay." Sarah's ears rang from the blast. She checked her laptop, miraculously still functional, though several systems were offline. But then she heard the voice she'd been dreading through her headset. "Chen, this is Reaper 7. I'm showing multiple system failures, losing signal integrity." She watched her screen in growing horror as the telemetry data from the Reaper drone began fragmenting. The aircraft's icon on her map flickered, jumped, then began descending. "Reaper 7, attempt emergency recovery protocol," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Negative, I've lost all control surfaces. She's going down. Impact in approximately 90 seconds. Grid coordinates." The transmission cut off. Sarah stared at her screen, watching the Reaper's icon spiral downward, down into the valley below, into hostile territory. The aircraft contained weeks of classified intelligence, facial recognition databases, operational patterns, information that could compromise dozens of ongoing operations if it fell into enemy hands. The icon disappeared from her screen. "Gone." Morrison appeared beside her, his face grim in the storm's strange light. "Tell me you didn't just lose a $32 million drone carrying classified intel in enemy territory." Sarah met his eyes. "I wish I could, sir." Rain began falling in sheets, cold and merciless. Lightning continued to strobe across the mountains, and somewhere in the valley below, their drone lay broken and exposed, a ticking time bomb of compromised intelligence. They were stranded, they were blind, they were alone. And their mission had just become a nightmare. Morrison pulled his team together in the meager shelter of the rocks, rain streaming off their helmets. "Listen up. Extraction isn't for another 30 hours. That drone contains intel that cannot fall into enemy hands. Anyone have any bright ideas?" In the silence that followed, punctuated only by thunder, Sarah realized that everything was about to change. Whether she was ready or not, the storm raged for another hour before finally moving east, leaving behind a cold, wet darkness and a team facing an impossible situation. Morrison had ordered them to full tactical alert, weapons trained on the valley approaches, night vision scanning for any sign that the drone crash had been noticed. So far nothing, but that wouldn't last. Sarah hunched over her laptop, running calculations in her head while water dripped from her helmet onto the keyboard. The Reaper had gone down approximately 4 kilometers into the valley, in a dried riverbed that twisted between two ridgelines. She pulled up the topographic maps, overlaying them with the last known trajectory data. "Talk to me, Chen," Morrison said, crouching beside her position. "What exactly was on that bird?" Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the classified manifest. 6 months of pattern-of-life analysis on the HVT and his network, facial recognition data on 43 individuals, communications intercepts, movement patterns for 12 vehicles, and she paused, knowing this would be the worst part, the operational plans for 3 other ongoing missions in this province. Morrison's jaw tightened. Jesus Christ. "The hard drive has a thermite self-destruct, but it requires manual activation," Sarah continued. "The drone has a classified IFF beacon that, if compromised, could expose our communications protocols. And the optical systems alone are worth millions in technology the enemy would love to reverse engineer." Lieutenant Barnes had joined them, water streaming off his uniform. "How long before hostiles find it?" "In this terrain, First light may be sooner if they saw it go down. Sarah zoomed in on the crash site. The riverbed is exposed, no overhead cover. Once the sun comes up, it'll be visible from multiple positions. So we have maybe 4 hours, Barnes calculated. Sir, we need to make a decision. Morrison stood, staring out into the darkness. Sarah could practically see the calculations running through his mind. Risk versus reward, mission versus survival, duty versus common sense. Options, Morrison said flatly. Rodriguez had recovered from the lightning strike, though his hands still trembled slightly as he worked on salvaging what he could of the communications array. We could try to call in an airstrike, take out the drone before anyone finds it. With what comms? Morrison gestured at the destroyed equipment. Even if we could reach TOC, there's no air assets close enough. Storms grounded everything within 200 miles. We wait for extraction and report the loss, Kim suggested. Let command decide how to handle it. 30 hours from now, Barnes shook his head. That intel will be in enemy hands and halfway to Tehran by then. They'll have time to roll up every operation we've been running. Martinez spoke up from her position. We go get it. Fast insertion, grab the hard drive, destroy the rest, exfil before anyone knows we're there. Morrison pulled out his map, studying it under a red lens flashlight. 4 clicks through hostile territory, no air support, no comms, no backup. If we get compromised, we're on our own until extraction. We're already on our own, sir, Barnes pointed out. Sarah studied the map over Morrison's shoulder, her eyes tracing the terrain with an attention to detail that went beyond standard infantry training. She saw the valley not as a 2-dimensional representation, but as a 3-dimensional space. Altitude changes, approach angles, dead zones, and sight lines. She saw it the way a pilot sees airspace. The direct route is suicide, Rodriguez was saying, his finger tracing a path on the map. We'd be exposed for at least 2 clicks, crossing 3 enemy patrol routes. What about the northern approach, Kim suggested, through the canyon system? Barnes studied it. That's even worse. Single file, no room to maneuver, perfect ambush territory. Sarah's eyes fixed on a narrow canyon that branched off the main valley, barely visible on the topographic map, just a thin line indicating a passage between 2 rock formations. Her mind automatically calculated approach angles, width restrictions, the way wind would funnel through that space. There, she said quietly, pointing at the map. The team turned to look at her. It was the first time she'd volunteered a tactical opinion. That canyon, Sarah continued, suddenly aware of 5 pairs of eyes studying her. It's not on any of the patrol routes, runs almost parallel to the riverbed, provides complete defilade from the enemy positions on the ridge. Morrison examined the map more closely. That canyon's less than 50 feet wide in places. How do you know it's even passable? The topographic line suggested is steep, narrow, but navigable. Sarah pulled up a satellite image on her laptop, enhancing the resolution. See here, the shadows indicate depth, but there's no debris flow blocking it. The geometry works. Rodriguez frowned. With all due respect, ma'am, looking at satellite imagery isn't the same as moving through hostile terrain in the dark. I understand that, Sergeant, but before we risk lives on a ground movement, we should do reconnaissance. Sarah gestured at her equipment. We still have the backup tactical drone. It's small, but it has good optics and thermal imaging. We could fly it through that canyon, verify it's passable, locate the exact crash site, and identify any enemy activity. Morrison considered this. Who would fly it? I can operate the controls, Rodriguez offered. Done it a few times in training. Sarah pulled up the flight control interface on her screen. That canyon has multiple turns, significant elevation changes, and rock formations creating turbulence patterns. No offense to Sergeant Rodriguez, but training exercises don't prepare you for that kind of precision flying in combat conditions. And you think you can do better? Kim's tone wasn't hostile, just skeptical. You're an analyst, Captain. Sarah met his eyes. I'm also qualified on this system. Qualified how? Morrison's voice carried the weight of command. Reading technical manuals. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. This was the moment. She could back down, defer to their expertise, return to being invisible, or she could tell them the truth. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm's final farewell. I have flight experience, Sarah said carefully. Extensive experience, including low-altitude operations in contested environments. The team exchanged glances. Barnes actually smiled, though not unkindly. Captain, I'm sure you've got hours in a Cessna or something, but this isn't exactly Sunday flying. That canyon is. I can fly it, Sarah interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. Morrison studied her face in the red light. You sound pretty confident for someone who works behind a desk. I haven't always worked behind a desk, sir. The silence stretched. Sarah could feel them evaluating her, measuring her words against their assumptions. She saw the doubt, the uncertainty, the ingrained skepticism that came from years of watching people overestimate their abilities and underestimate the battlefield's brutality. Rodriguez shook his head. Look, no disrespect intended, but flying a drone through that canyon in the dark with enemy all around, that's not something you learn from a manual. That takes instinct, muscle memory, combat experience. I have combat experience, Sarah said quietly. How much? Morrison asked bluntly. Sarah held his gaze. Enough to know I can do this. That's not an answer, Captain. With respect, sir, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I can execute this reconnaissance mission. The question is whether you trust me to try. Barnes laughed, breaking the tension. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't fly drones through canyon systems at night. No, Sarah agreed. Experience does, and I have more than you might think. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Something in her tone, her bearing, her unshakable confidence despite their skepticism. It didn't match the profile of a desk-bound analyst. What aren't you telling us, Captain? Sarah reached for her dog tags, her fingers closing around the metal beneath her uniform. This was it. The moment she'd been both dreading and, in some hidden part of herself, anticipating since the mission began. I'm telling you I can fly that drone through the canyon and locate our Reaper, she said evenly. But if you want to know why I'm so certain, I need to show you something. She pulled the worn dog tags from beneath her uniform and held them out to Morrison. In the red light of the observation post, he read them. And everything changed. Major Jake Morrison held the dog tags up to his red lens flashlight, squinting at the worn metal in the dim glow. His lips moved silently as he read, then stopped. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and he read again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Captain Sarah Chen, he read aloud, his voice quiet. Then he paused, his eyes finding the call sign etched below her name. Call sign Phoenix. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Rodriguez straightened. Wait, Phoenix, as in. A-10 Thunderbolt II pilot, Morrison continued reading, his voice gaining an edge of disbelief. 355th Fighter Squadron, service dates 2012 to 2018. He looked up at Sarah, really seeing her for the first time. You're a Warthog driver. Was, Sarah corrected quietly, past tense. Barnes had moved closer, staring at the dog tags in Morrison's hand like they were artifacts from another world. How many missions? Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. 203 combat sorties. 6 years flying close air support over Iraq and Afghanistan. The silence that followed was different from before, not skeptical, not dismissive, something closer to shock. Holy shit, Kim breathed. I think I've heard of you. Phoenix Chen, Didn't you fly a damaged bird back to base on one engine? Saved a platoon that was pinned down. Kandahar 2016, Sarah confirmed. 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry. They'd walked into an ambush in the Arghandab River Valley. I provided close air support for 47 minutes while my aircraft fell apart around me. Martinez's eyes were wide. I remember that story. They said the pilot flew with a dead engine, no hydraulics, and a fire warning light that wouldn't stop screaming. Made an emergency landing with half the tail shot off. 3/4 of the tail, Sarah corrected with a slight, humorless smile. The landing broke my back in 3 places, L2, L3, and L4 vertebrae. Spent 8 months in recovery, another 6 in physical therapy. The medical board said I'd never pass a flight physical again. Morrison was still processing, his tactical mind recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the quiet analyst who'd been attached to his team. You have 3 distinguished flying crosses, and 2 Purple Hearts, a bronze star with Valor device, and an air medal with 17 oak leaf clusters, Sarah said matter-of-factly, not bragging, just stating facts. But none of that matters right now. What matters is that I have 3,400 hours of flight time, most of it in combat zones, a significant portion at altitudes below 500 feet. Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. Why the hell are you working as an intelligence analyst? Why aren't you still flying? Because the Air Force decided my back couldn't handle the G-forces anymore, Sarah said, and for the first time, Morrison heard the edge of bitterness in her voice. Didn't matter that I felt fine, that I wanted to stay in the cockpit. Medical board has final say. They grounded me permanently in 2018. Gave me options. Take a medical discharge with full benefits or transition to a different Air Force specialty. So you chose intelligence, Barnes said slowly, understanding dawning. I chose to stay useful, Sarah corrected. I know how to read terrain from altitude. I understand how pilots think, how close air support works, how to coordinate air and ground operations. Intelligence seemed like a way to keep contributing to the mission, even if I couldn't fly it myself. Morrison handed her dog tags back, his expression completely transformed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with regret. Captain, I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions. You made assumptions based on available information, Sarah interrupted, tucking the tags back under her uniform. I'm wearing analyst insignia. I arrived from an intelligence unit, and I've been doing desk work for 18 months. You had no reason to think I was anything else. But you knew, Kim said. You knew we were dismissing you, and you didn't say anything. Sarah shrugged. What was I supposed to do? Walk up and announce my credentials? That's not how teams work. You earn respect through actions, not resumes. I was willing to do that. Still am. Martinez spoke up, her medic's instinct focusing on the practical. You're back. You said it's permanently damaged. Can you physically handle flying the drone? Some of those systems require sustained periods of fine motor control. I can handle it, Sarah assured her. The injury limits my ability to withstand high-G maneuvers in a fighter jet, but it doesn't affect my hands, my reflexes, or my ability to read three-dimensional space. I've kept up my drone certification specifically because I knew I might need them. Rodriguez had pulled up the tactical drone from their equipment cache, setting it on a flat rock and beginning the pre-flight checklist. Okay, so you're not just some analyst. You're a combat pilot with thousands of hours. That changes things. It changes the math, Morrison agreed, studying the map with new eyes. If Chen can actually fly reconnaissance through that canyon system, we can verify the approach route, locate the exact crash site, and identify enemy positions before we commit to a ground movement. I can do more than that, Sarah said, moving to stand beside him. She pointed at the map, her finger tracing routes with the precision of someone who'd planned hundreds of attack runs. Once I locate the Reaper, I can provide overwatch during your extraction. The tactical drone has thermal imaging. I can spot enemy movement before they spot you. I can create diversions if needed, draw attention away from your position." Barnes was nodding now, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated. "She's talking about providing close air support with a quadcopter." "It's what I do," Sarah said simply. "Or what I did anyway. The platform's different, but the principles are the same. Keep friendly forces alive, deny the enemy their objectives, adapt to changing circumstances." Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Sarah met his gaze steadily. She could see him making the decision, weighing the risks against the potential benefits, accepting that the person he dismissed as dead weight might actually be their best asset. "All right, Captain Chen," Morrison said finally, and there was a new tone in his voice, partnership rather than command. "Or should I say Phoenix?" "Sarah's fine, sir." "Sarah it is." Morrison turned to the team. "New plan. Chen Sarah conducts aerial reconnaissance with the tactical drone. She identifies the crash site, maps enemy positions, and finds us a safe approach route. If she confirms the canyon is passable, we move at first light. Rodriguez, get that drone ready for flight. Barnes, Kim, start planning the ground movement based on whatever intel Sarah brings us. Martinez, prepare for a 4-click movement with possible contact." The team moved into action, their movements now purposeful and coordinated. But there was a difference Sarah could feel. They were moving with her now, not around her. Rodriguez handed Sarah the drone controller, their eyes meeting. "I heard about Kandahar," he said quietly. "My cousin was in that platoon you saved. He made it home because of you." Sarah's throat tightened unexpectedly. "What's his name?" "Specialist David Rodriguez. He's back in Texas now, married with 2 kids." "I'm glad," Sarah said and meant it. "So am I," Rodriguez smiled. "Go find our drone, Phoenix. We've got your back." Sarah nodded, settling into position with the controller. Her hands moved across the interface with the fluid confidence of muscle memory that never really fades. The tactical drone's rotors spun up with a high-pitched whine, and the familiar vibration of an aircraft under her control thrummed through her palms. For the first time in 18 months, Sarah Chen felt like herself again. "Phoenix is airborne," she announced softly, and launched the drone into the darkness. Below her, 4 kilometers into hostile territory, their Reaper waited. And Sarah was going to bring it home. The tactical drone rose from their position like a mechanical ghost, its 4 rotors barely audible above the wind that still whistled through the rocks. Sarah's eyes locked onto the controller's screen, her thumbs resting lightly on the sticks, feeling the aircraft's response through the subtle feedback of the controls. It had been 18 months since she'd flown anything, but her hands remembered. Muscle memory built over thousands of hours doesn't disappear. It just waits, dormant, for the moment it's needed again. "Initial altitude 500 feet, Sarah reported, her voice falling into the calm, professional tone she'd used on countless combat missions. "Heading 090, speed 40 knots, beginning descent into approach corridor." Morrison crouched beside her, watching the screen over her shoulder. The feed showed the rocky terrain sliding past in shades of green and gray through the night vision camera. "What's your plan?" "Stay low, use terrain masking to avoid detection. The canyon entrance is 1 click ahead. I'll drop to 200 feet, then follow the natural contours." Sarah's right thumb made a minute adjustment, banking the drone slightly to avoid a rock outcropping that appeared on the screen. Speed and altitude are inversely related to detection probability. Lower and slower means harder to spot, but less room for error. "And if you clip a canyon wall at 40 knots?" Barnes asked, though his tone was more curious than challenging now. "Then we're out 1 drone and back to the drawing board," Sarah replied. "But I won't clip anything." The confidence in her voice wasn't arrogance. It was the calm certainty of someone who'd flown through worse, much worse. The drone reached the canyon entrance, a narrow cleft in the rock face that looked barely wide enough for the aircraft's rotor span. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pushed the left stick forward, dropping altitude rapidly while simultaneously reducing speed. The drone dove toward the canyon mouth like a raptor striking prey. "Jesus," Rodriguez breathed, watching the walls blur past on the screen. "That clearance can't be more than 12 feet on either side," Sarah said, her eyes tracking the telemetry data without looking away from the visual feed. "Rotor diameter is 8 feet. Plenty of room." "Plenty of room," Kim sounded incredulous. "In an A-10, I used to fly through mountain passes with 50 feet of clearance on each wing," Sarah said, banking the drone through the first turn in the canyon. "This is spacious by comparison." The canyon twisted like a serpent, its walls rising higher as the drone descended deeper into the earth. Sarah flew with a smoothness that made it look effortless, but everyone watching knew better. Every adjustment of the controls was precise, calculated, compensating for wind currents that funneled through the narrow space, for downdrafts created by temperature differentials, for the optical illusions created by night vision that could make distances deceive the eye. "Contact," Martinez suddenly announced from her observation position. "Thermal signature, 11 o'clock, 200 meters." Sarah had already seen it, a hot spot on the screen that resolved into human shapes as she adjusted the camera zoom. 3 figures, moving along the ridge above the canyon. "Enemy patrol," Morrison confirmed, studying the shapes. "They haven't spotted the drone." "They won't," Sarah said, dropping the drone another 50 feet and tucking it closer to the canyon's left wall. "I'm below their sight line and moving through their acoustic shadow. By the time the sound reaches them, I'll be past." She was right. The drone slipped through the canyon beneath the patrol's position, invisible and silent as smoke. Sarah's hands never stopped moving, tiny corrections, constant adjustments, reading the terrain ahead and planning her Route 3 moves in advance like a chess master. "How are you doing that?" Rodriguez asked, genuinely amazed. "Flying without GPS in a canyon at night." "Visual reference points, terrain association, and dead reckoning," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the screen. "Same way pilots navigated before satellites. You pick distinctive features, that rock formation, the angle of that cliff face, the width variations in the canyon, and you build a mental map as you fly. Your instruments tell you one story, but your eyes tell you the truth." The canyon opened suddenly into a wider section, and Sarah increased speed to 60 knots, using the extra room to make up time. The controller's telemetry showed they'd covered 2 kilometers in just under 4 minutes. "Coming up on the primary valley," Sarah announced. "Reducing speed, increasing altitude for better observation." The drone climbed smoothly, rising above the canyon rim but staying low enough to blend with the terrain on thermal imaging. The main valley spread out before them, a dried riverbed cutting through the landscape like a scar. And there, 300 meters ahead, lay their target. "Visual on the Reaper," Sarah said, zooming the camera. "Grid coordinates November Juliet 427835. The crashed drone lay on its belly in the riverbed, one wing crumpled beneath its fuselage, the other pointing skyward at an unnatural angle. The tail section had separated on impact, lying 20 feet away. Even through the grainy night vision feed, they could see the classified IFF transponder housing had cracked open on impact. "Damn," Morrison muttered. "She's in worse shape than I hoped." Sarah was already scanning the surrounding area, the tactical drone orbiting the crash site in a wide arc. "No immediate enemy presence at the site, but I'm picking up heat signatures in 3 locations." She marked them on the digital map. "Here, here, and here. Looks like observation posts on the ridgelines. They have direct line of sight to the Reaper." "How many personnel?" Barnes asked. "First position 2 individuals, second position 3, third position." Sarah enhanced the thermal image. 4, possibly 5. Call it 10 to 12 hostiles with eyes on our objective." Kim whistled low. That's a problem. Gets worse, Sarah said, continuing her reconnaissance orbit. I'm picking up vehicle tracks along this road, fresh ones post-storm. Someone's been moving through here recently. She checked the time stamp on the feed. And there's increased radio traffic. I'm picking up electromagnetic emissions consistent with tactical radios from that compound. Morrison's jaw clenched. They know something's out here. Maybe they saw the Reaper go down, maybe they heard it crash. Either way, they're looking. Which means we don't have until first light, Barnes concluded. We have maybe an hour, 2 at most, before they organize a proper search. Sarah brought the drone lower, flying it along the approach route she'd mapped through the canyon. The good news is the route is clear. The canyon opens into the valley about 400 meters from the crash site. It provides complete concealment until the final approach. You'd have maybe 90 seconds of exposure to reach the Reaper, but if we time it right. If we time it what? Rodriguez prompted when she paused. Sarah's eyes had fixed on something on the screen. Movement, subtle but unmistakable, coming from the north. She zoomed in, her heart rate increasing despite her training. Contact, she said quietly. Vehicle convoy, 3 trucks, heading toward the valley from the north. ETA to the crash site approximately 12 minutes. The team exchanged grim looks. They're coming for it, Morrison said. They're coming for our drone. Sarah continued flying, her mind racing through options, calculating angles and distances and probabilities. The tactical drone had maybe 20 minutes of battery life remaining. The enemy convoy was 12 minutes out. The team would need at least 15 minutes to reach the crash site through the canyon approach. The math didn't work. Unless she changed the equation. I can buy you time, Sarah said suddenly. Morrison looked at her sharply. How? Sarah's hands moved across the controller, adjusting the drone's position. She was seeing the valley the way she used to see battlefields from her A-10's cockpit, not as static terrain, but as a dynamic space where geometry, timing, and aggression could create opportunities that didn't exist on paper. I can run interference, she said. Harass that convoy, slow them down, keep them from reaching the Reaper until you can get there first. With a quadcopter, Kim sounded doubtful. What are you going to do, annoy them to death? Sarah smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd faced down surface-to-air missiles and lived to talk about it. Sergeant, I've made career out of convincing people to shoot at me instead of the people I'm protecting. The platform doesn't matter. The principles are the same. She looked at Morrison, her eyes steady. I can give you the time you need, sir, but we have to move now. Morrison studied her face for a heartbeat, then made his decision. Do it, he ordered. Rodriguez, Kim, Martinez, gear up. We're going hunting. Sarah's thumbs moved on the controller, banking the drone toward the approaching convoy. Phoenix was going back to war. Sarah's fingers danced across the controller as she positioned the tactical drone between the enemy convoy and the crashed Reaper. On her screen, 3 trucks crawled along the dirt road like mechanical insects, their headlights cutting through the darkness. 12 minutes until they reached the valley floor. 12 minutes to turn an impossible mission into merely dangerous. Talk to me, Chen, Morrison said, already strapping on his gear. What's the plan? Sarah's eyes never left the screen, but her mind was racing through calculations honed over 200 combat missions. The convoy's moving cautiously, maybe 20 kilometers per hour on that rough road. They're not sure what they're looking for yet, just investigating. That gives us an advantage. What kind of advantage? Barnes asked, checking his rifle's chamber. They're reactive right now, not proactive. I can exploit that. Sarah zoomed in on the terrain between the convoy and the crash site. There's a ridgeline here, about 600 meters from the Reaper. If I can draw their attention to that ridge, make them think there's activity there, they'll deploy to investigate. That puts them moving perpendicular to your approach route. Rodriguez studied the map, understanding dawning. You're going to make them look west while we come in from the south. Exactly. And while they're deployed and disorganized, you'll have your window. Sarah's thumb twitched, adjusting the drone's altitude. But it has to be convincing. If they think it's just a bird or debris, they'll ignore it and keep moving toward the Reaper. How do you make it convincing? Martinez asked, securing her medical kit. Sarah's expression was focused, distant, like she was seeing something the others couldn't. I'll simulate a reconnaissance pattern, fly erratic but purposeful, like someone trying to stay hidden but doing a bad job of it. Then I'll use the terrain to create signatures they can't ignore. Kim frowned. What kind of signatures? Sound, movement, confusion. Sarah pulled up a tactical overlay. The drone has enough power to create small rock slides if I use the rotor wash correctly. In the dark, with night vision, they won't be able to tell the difference between that and a team moving through the rocks. Their natural instinct will be to investigate, especially if they think they have us pinned. Morrison was nodding slowly, recognizing the tactics. You're going to make them think they've found us. More than that, I'm going to make them think they've cornered us. Sarah looked up at him, and in that moment Morrison saw not the analyst but the combat pilot, the warrior who'd flown into hell repeatedly and always come back. In close air support, you learn that the enemy will always chase what they think is vulnerable. You show them weakness, and they'll commit resources to exploit it. That's when you hit them where they're not looking. Except we can't hit them, Rodriguez pointed out. We're just sneaking past. We don't need to hit them, we just need them looking the wrong direction. Sarah checked the drone's battery, 18 minutes remaining. Here's how it works. I'll make contact with the convoy in 7 minutes right here. She pointed at the map. I'll buzz them, let them see the drone clearly, then lead them toward this ridgeline. They'll pursue its human nature. While they're deploying to surround the ridge, thinking they've got American forces trapped, you'll approach the Reaper from the south through the canyon. Barnes traced the route with his finger. We'll be exposed for about 90 seconds crossing the riverbed. 73 seconds at a tactical run, Sarah corrected. I've calculated your approach speed and the distance. Once you reach the Reaper, you'll have approximately 4 minutes to extract the hard drive and place the thermite charges before my diversion runs out of time. 4 minutes, Kim looked skeptical. That's cutting it close. It's enough if you're fast and don't second-guess yourselves. Sarah pulled up a schematic of the Reaper. The hard drive bay is here behind this access panel. 3 screws, all Phillips head. Martinez, you're the smallest. You'll handle the extraction. Kim, you place the thermite. Morrison and Barnes provide security. Rodriguez maintains communications with me. Morrison studied her face. What happens when they realize the ridge is empty and you've been playing them? Sarah's expression didn't change. They'll redirect to the real target, the Reaper. But by then, you'll have what you came for and be back in the canyon. I'll keep them occupied as long as possible, then break contact and rally back to your position. And if they shoot down the drone before you can break contact? Martinez asked quietly. Then you complete the mission without overwatch and make it back on your own, Sarah said matter-of-factly. The drone's expendable. The intel isn't. Neither are you. The team finished their gear checks in silence, each member processing the plan and their role in it. Sarah continued monitoring the enemy convoy, her hands steady on the controller despite the weight of what she was proposing. She'd done this before, drawn enemy fire while others completed their missions. But back then, she'd been in an armored aircraft with a 30mm cannon. Now she had a plastic quadcopter with 20 minutes of battery life. The fundamental equation hadn't changed, though. Create the opportunity, exploit the opening, keep your people alive. Morrison moved beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. This is what you did, isn't it? In your A-10, you were the one who flew between the enemy and friendly forces. Close air support doctrine, Sarah replied, still watching her screen. You put yourself between the threat and the troops on the ground. Sometimes that means destroying the threat. Sometimes it just means making them worry about you instead. You're asking us to trust you with our lives. Sarah finally looked at him. No, sir. I'm telling you I can give you the window you need to complete this mission. What you do with that window is up to you, but I won't let you down." Morrison held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Nobody better." He turned to the team. 5 minutes. Final checks. When Phoenix makes contact with that convoy, we move fast and we move quiet. Questions? "Just one," Rodriguez said, adjusting his night vision mount. "Phoenix, what happens if things go sideways? What's the abort code?" Sarah's lips curved into a slight smile. "There is no abort code, Sergeant. We're committed the moment I make contact. The only way out is through." Barnes actually laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Should have known. A-10 pilots don't do abort codes." "No," Sarah agreed, "we don't." The minutes ticked down. The enemy convoy continued its steady approach, now just 8 minutes from the valley floor. Sarah watched them through the drone's camera, studying their formation, their spacing, their behavior. She was reading them the way a hunter reads prey, looking for the moment when they'd be most vulnerable to misdirection. 3 minutes, she announced. "Morrison, get your team to the canyon entrance. I'll make contact on your signal." The 4 operators moved like shadows, slipping from the observation post and disappearing into the darkness toward the canyon approach. Sarah watched them go on her secondary screen, thermal signatures fading as they descended into the natural concealment of the rocks. Rodriguez's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Phoenix, Sierra 16, we're in position at the canyon entrance, standing by." Sarah's hands tightened on the controller. The enemy convoy was now just 2 kilometers from the valley, headlights bouncing over the rough terrain. Her drone hung in the darkness between them and their objective, invisible for now but about to become very, very visible. "Copy, Sierra 16, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the calm that came before the storm. "Beginning approach on the convoy. Stand by for contact." She pushed the controller forward, and the drone descended toward the convoy like a stone dropped from heaven. "Time to dance," Sarah whispered. And the game began. Sarah dropped the drone to 50 feet above the road, coming in fast and aggressive from the enemy convoy's blind side. Through the night vision feed, she could see the 3 trucks clearly now, technical vehicles with machine guns mounted in their beds, canvas covers flapping in the wind. Approximately 12 fighters total, AK-47s visible in the cab lights. "Sierra 16 Phoenix," Sarah transmitted, her voice ice calm. "Initiating contact in 3, 2, 1. She pushed the throttle to maximum and dove the drone directly over the lead truck at 35 miles per hour, rotors screaming. The sudden noise from above shattered the quiet night. She saw heads snap upward, weapons swing toward the sky, mouths opening in shouts lost to the wind. The lead truck swerved, nearly hitting the vehicle behind it. Brake lights flared red in the darkness. Men jumped from the truck beds, weapons raised, scanning the sky frantically. "Contact confirmed," Sarah reported, banking the drone hard left and climbing. "Convoy has stopped. All personnel dismounted. They're searching for the source." "Copy," Morrison's voice came back. "We're moving." Sarah didn't acknowledge. She was too busy flying. She brought the drone around in a wide arc, letting them see it again, closer this time. Close enough that in the split second they had, they'd recognize it as American technology. Close enough to make them angry. Muzzle flashes erupted from below. The distinctive chatter of automatic weapons fire echoed across the valley. Tracer rounds drew glowing lines through the darkness, most of them nowhere near the drone, but enough to show that she had their complete attention. "They're shooting at you," Rodriguez's voice held a note of concern. "That's the idea," Sarah replied, dancing the drone through the gunfire. Years of muscle memory guided her hands. The same instincts that had kept her alive through surface-to-air missiles now translated to dodging rifle fire. She zigged when they expected her to zag, climbed when they anticipated a dive, always moving, never predictable. She led them on a chase, the drone moving erratically toward the western ridgeline, like a reconnaissance team trying desperately to avoid detection but failing. The enemy took the bait. Through her camera, Sarah watched them pile back into the trucks, engines roaring to life, headlights sweeping across the terrain as they pursued. Sierra 1-6, targets are moving west away from your position, Sarah transmitted. You have the window. I say again, you have the window. Moving now, Morrison's voice was tight with controlled urgency. Sarah couldn't watch them. She had to focus on keeping the enemy convinced. She flew the drone toward the ridgeline, then began flying aggressive patterns along its face. She found a loose scree field and hovered the drone low, using the rotor wash to dislodge rocks that tumbled down the slope with audible clatters. The effect was immediate. The enemy convoy stopped 400 meters from the ridge, and fighters began deploying in a tactical formation. Through her thermal imaging, Sarah watched them spread out, thinking they were surrounding an American reconnaissance team. Officers shouted orders. Machine guns were positioned. They were committing completely to the threat they thought they'd found. "Beautiful," Sarah whispered, watching the tactical situation unfold. Every enemy soldier focused on the ridge meant one less looking toward the riverbed where Morrison's team was now sprinting across open ground. She checked her secondary screen. The team's thermal signatures were halfway to the Reaper, 60 seconds of exposure remaining. But then Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. A new thermal signature appeared on her screen, emerging from a position they'd missed in the initial reconnaissance. A fifth observation post, hidden in the rocks overlooking the riverbed. 3 fighters, and they were looking south, directly toward Morrison's team. "Sierra 1-6, Phoenix, you have eyes on you." Sarah's calm cracked slightly. 3 contacts, your 9 o'clock elevated position. They're about to. She saw the muzzle flashes before she finished the sentence. Gunfire erupted from the rocks. On her screen, the team's thermal signatures scattered, diving for whatever cover the exposed riverbed offered, which wasn't much. She could hear Morrison's voice, clipped and urgent, directing his team's return fire. Sarah's mind raced. The team was pinned down, 60 meters from the Reaper, with minimal cover. The enemy on the ridgeline would hear the gunfire in seconds and realize they'd been duped. Once they redirected to the riverbed, Morrison's team would be surrounded and overwhelmed. She had maybe 30 seconds to change the equation. Sarah looked at her battery indicator, 11 minutes remaining. Looked at the distance to the enemy position shooting at her team, 200 meters. Looked at the drone's speed capability, 55 miles per hour maximum. The math was simple, the decision even simpler. "Hold on," she muttered, and pushed the controller to its limits. The drone accelerated like a bullet, racing across the valley toward the enemy position. Sarah flew it with every ounce of skill and fury she possessed, weaving through the darkness at an altitude that made her stomach clench even watching through a screen. She was flying the way she used to fly the A-10, low, fast, and absolutely committed. The 3 fighters at the observation post were focused on the Americans below, squeezing off shots, adjusting their aim. They never saw the drone coming. Sarah screamed the quadcopter past them at head height, rotors shrieking like a banshee. The psychological effect was instantaneous and devastating. One fighter threw himself backward, tumbling down the rocks. Another spun, firing wildly at the sky. The third froze, his night vision probably ruined by his own muzzle flashes. But Sarah wasn't done. She banked the drone hard, coming around for another pass, this time even closer. She flew it directly at the closest fighter's face, forcing him to duck, to move, to forget about the Americans in the riverbed and focus entirely on the mechanical demon that had appeared from nowhere. The enemy fighters scattered, diving for cover, shooting at shadows. Their disciplined firing positions dissolved into chaos. "Go, go, go," Sarah heard Morrison shouting to his team. On her secondary screen, the thermal signatures were moving again, sprinting the final distance to the Reaper. She kept the drone orbiting the enemy position, buzzing them every time they tried to reorient, giving Morrison's team every second she could buy them. Gunfire stitched through the air around the drone. Sarah felt more than heard the controller vibrate as a round clipped one of the rotors. The drone lurched, wobbling, but she compensated, keeping it airborne through sheer will and technical skill. "Phoenix, we're at the package," Martinez's voice came through, "beginning extraction." Sarah checked the ridgeline. The enemy force that had been surrounding the threat was now turning, realizing they'd been fooled. Headlights swiveled, engines roared. They'd be at the riverbed in less than 3 minutes. "You've got 2 minutes 45 seconds, Sarah transmitted, still flying circles around the observation post. "Make it count." Another burst of gunfire. This time, Sarah felt the drone shudder badly. She glanced at her diagnostics. Rotor 3 was critical, battery drain had accelerated from the damage, and she was losing altitude at a rate she couldn't fully control. The drone had maybe 90 seconds left before it fell from the sky. "Rodriguez, extraction status," Morrison's voice demanded. "Hard drive is secured," Kim's voice this time. "Setting thermite charges now." Sarah's damaged drone dipped dangerously low. She fought it back up, but the controls were becoming sluggish, unresponsive. One of the fighters below had figured out the drone's limitations and was tracking it more carefully, leading his shots. 70 seconds of flight time remaining, maybe less. "Charges set," Kim confirmed. 30-second fuse. "Fall back to the canyon," Morrison ordered. "Phoenix, we're Winchester on the objective. Break contact and rally on our position." Sarah wanted to. She tried to bank the drone away from the enemy position, but it was losing too much altitude too fast. The damaged rotor was failing, creating an uncontrollable spin. Through her screen, she could see the ground rushing up, the enemy fighters below tracking her descent. And then she saw it, the convoy from the ridge, racing toward the riverbed at maximum speed. If they reached Morrison's team before the team made it to the canyon entrance, it would be a massacre. Sarah looked at her battery, 60 seconds, looked at the convoy, 90 seconds from intercept, looked at her team's position. They needed 2 minutes to reach safety. The math didn't work, unless she changed it one more time. "Phoenix, acknowledge," Rodriguez's voice was urgent. "Rally on our position." Sarah's hands moved across the controller, no longer trying to save the drone but aiming it. She pointed the failing aircraft directly at the lead convoy vehicle, maxed out what was left of her throttle, and locked the controls. "Phoenix copies," she said quietly. "Breaking contact now." The drone accelerated on its final flight, rotors screaming their death song, diving toward the lead truck like a meteor. Sarah watched through the camera feed as the ground rushed up, as the driver's eyes went wide in his headlights, as he yanked the wheel hard to avoid what looked like an incoming missile. The truck swerved violently off the road, rolling twice before crashing into a ditch. The vehicles behind it hit their brakes, the convoy dissolving into confused chaos. Sarah's screen went black. In the sudden silence of the observation post, she released the controller and keyed her radio. "Sierra 16 Phoenix, drone is down. Convoy is stalled, you're clear to the canyon, good hunting." She heard the distant boom of the thermite charges igniting, destroying what was left of the Reaper. Mission accomplished. The observation post felt eerily quiet after the chaos. Sarah sat motionless, staring at the blank screen of her controller, her hands still gripping the useless device. Somewhere in the valley below, her drone lay in pieces, but Morrison's team was alive and moving toward safety. That was all that mattered. She checked her watch. 28 hours until scheduled extraction, an eternity in hostile territory. "Phoenix, Sierra 16. Morrison's voice crackled in her earpiece, slightly breathless from running. "We're in the canyon, all personnel accounted for, package secured." Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief she hadn't realized she was holding. Copy Sierra 16. Good work. Good work, Rodriguez's voice came through, and despite the circumstances, she could hear the hint of amusement. Ma'am, you just crashed a drone into a convoy like it was a guided missile. That was insane. It was necessary, Sarah corrected, but she was smiling slightly. ETA to the op. 45 minutes if we hustle. Stay frosty up there. The next hour crawled by. Sarah maintained watch on the valley with her rifle scope and the remaining thermal optics, tracking the chaos her diversion had created. The enemy was scattered, disorganized, searching in wrong directions. By the time they reorganized and figured out what had actually happened, Morrison's team was back at the observation post, breathless and mud-covered but whole. Martinez was the first to reach Sarah's position. Without a word, the medic pulled out a canteen and handed it to her. "Drink. You look like hell." Sarah hadn't realized how thirsty she was. She drained half the canteen before speaking. "Thanks." Morrison appeared moments later, the Reaper's hard drive secured in a protective case on his vest. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and something in his expression had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition. The acknowledgement of one warrior by another. "That was some flying, Captain," he said simply. "Just doing what I was trained for, sir." "No," Morrison shook his head, crouching beside her. "What you did went beyond training. You put yourself between us and the threat. You sacrificed your overwatch capability to buy us seconds we needed. That's not training. That's instinct. That's," he paused, searching for the right word, "that's who you are." Sarah met his eyes. "It's who I was, who I still am, I guess, even behind a desk." "You're not behind a desk right now." "No, sir, I'm not." The rest of the team gathered around, and Sarah saw it in all their faces. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten. The bond that forms between people who have been through fire together. Kim handed her an energy bar. "For what it's worth, that thing you did with the drone at the end. My vote for ballsiest maneuver of the year." "Seconded," Barnes added. "Though maybe don't mention it in the after-action report. Pretty sure using a reconnaissance drone as a kinetic weapon violates some regulation somewhere." "Several regulations," Rodriguez confirmed cheerfully. "But who's counting?" They settled in to wait for extraction, taking shifts on watch, each person now treating Sarah as a full member of the team rather than cargo to be protected. The conversation during the long hours was different too. They asked about her combat missions, her A-10, what it was like flying close air support. Sarah answered their questions, falling into the old camaraderie of warriors sharing war stories. Martinez, during a quiet moment, asked the question the others probably wanted to but hadn't. "Do you miss it? Flying, I mean." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting them gold and crimson. "Every single day," she finally said. "But missing something and moving forward aren't mutually exclusive. I can honor what I was while accepting what I am now." "What are you now?" Martinez asked gently. Sarah considered. "Someone who still serves, just differently." The extraction helicopter arrived exactly on schedule, its rotors a welcome thunder against the dawn sky. As they lifted off, Sarah looked down at the valley one last time, at the canyon she'd flown through, the ridgeline where she'd drawn fire, the spot where their Reaper had fallen and been destroyed. Phoenix had flown again, even if just for one night, even if it was the last time. Back at Fob Shank, the debriefing was thorough and professional. The recovered hard drive contained everything they'd hoped, intelligence that would lead to the disruption of 3 major enemy operations and the capture of 14 high-value targets over the following month. Colonel Matthews himself shook Sarah's hand, though she suspected Morrison had briefed him on what really happened during that mission. But it was what happened in the days after that showed Sarah how much had truly changed. She was walking to the intelligence center 3 days later when she passed a group of special operations soldiers conducting pre-mission brief. One of them saw her, said something to his team, and suddenly all of them stood straighter. One nodded respectfully. Another said simply, "Ma'am." The story had spread, as stories always do in the military. Not all the details, operational security saw to that, but enough. Enough that people knew the quiet analyst wasn't quite what she seemed. That Captain Chen had been Phoenix once and when it mattered, had found a way to be Phoenix again. Sarah entered the briefing room for her regular intelligence update. The room was full of operators from various units, people who'd barely acknowledged her existence a week ago. As she walked to her seat, something unexpected happened. They stood. Not all at once, not making a production of it, but in that subtle, genuine way that soldiers show respect to other soldiers who have earned it. It lasted only a few seconds before everyone returned to normal, but Sarah felt it like a physical touch. Morrison was there, preparing for his next mission. He caught her eye and nodded once, a simple gesture that said everything that needed saying. After the briefing, as people filed out, a young private approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, I heard. Someone said you were a Warthog pilot. Is that true?" Sarah studied the kid's earnest face, saw the hope and admiration there. She remembered being young once, believing that warriors looked a certain way, came from certain places, fit certain molds. "I was," she said gently, "and now I'm here doing this. Both matter, both serve." "But which one is more important?" Sarah smiled. "The one you're doing right now, always." The private nodded, seeming to understand something he couldn't quite articulate, and walked away. Sarah gathered her materials and headed back to her desk, her real desk, with its computers and classified documents and the unglamorous work of intelligence analysis. Tomorrow, she'd be back to studying enemy patterns, building target packages, supporting missions from behind the scenes. But something was different now. She was different. She'd proven to herself what she'd started to doubt during those long months behind a desk, that the warrior's spirit doesn't disappear when circumstances change. It adapts. It finds new ways to serve, new battles to fight, new ways to stand between the threat and those who need protecting. Sarah sat at her desk and opened her laptop, ready to begin the next day's work. On her screen, a new mission brief waited. She read through it carefully, her trained eye catching details others might miss, her experience shaping her analysis in ways that would keep soldiers alive. Phoenix wasn't just a call sign she'd earned in a cockpit. It was who she was, someone who rose from the ashes every time circumstances tried to ground her, someone who found ways to fly even when the sky was taken away. She'd been a pilot, now she was an analyst. Tomorrow she might be something else entirely. But always, she would be a warrior. And warriors don't quit, they adapt, they overcome, they serve. Sarah Chen smiled slightly, her fingers moving across the keyboard, already planning how to support the next mission, how to use everything she'd learned, in cockpits and behind desks and in one desperate night in the Afghan mountains, to bring people home alive. Phoenix had risen, and she wasn't done flying yet. The end.